Welcome to Forgotten Tales of the Past, where history's little-known stories come to life. From obscure events in American history to fascinating moments from Europe's past, we dive deep into the stories that time forgot. Join us every week as we uncover hidden gems of history, one tale at a time.
And today we're definitely diving deep into one of those hidden gems.
We really are. We're plunging into, well, a truly surprising and often overlooked theater of World War II. The Aleutian Islands Campaign.
Right, happening between 1942 and 1943.
Exactly. And it's in a place, most of us probably don't immediately think of when we picture the Pacific War, the Aleutian Islands.
Right.
Very remote, very rugged.
Definitely challenging terrain.
So our mission today is really to uncover the key events and understand the significance of this whole campaign. And here's a question for you listening. Did you know that part of American soil was actually occupied by Japanese forces during World War II?
It's a startling fact, isn't it? And it highlights how this campaign, often just a footnote compared to, say, Guadalcanal or Midway, really shows the sheer global scale of the war.
It really does. These islands, stretching way out there towards Russia,
Yeah.
They became this unexpected battlefield.
A very challenging one, too.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's get into it. It really kicked off in June 1942, didn't it?
That's when the Japanese bombed Dutch Harbor on Unalaska Island, June 3rd and 4th.
Right, the bombing raids. But that wasn't all. This is where it gets really interesting.
You mean the landings?
Yes, an actual invasion of American territory followed,
Yeah.
and it was unopposed initially.
Yep. That's the incredible part. Just days after the bombing, June 6th and 7th, Japanese forces landed on Attu and Kiska Islands.
Unopposed. How? I mean, were we just not expecting anything up there?
Well, the sheer remoteness was a factor, and the American military presence right there on those specific islands was very limited at that exact moment. It allowed them to just walk ashore and establish that foothold.
Wow. The only occupation of U.S. territory during the whole war.
The only one by enemy forces, yeah. It's a really significant point.
Definitely needs more airtime, historically speaking. So, okay, Japan has forces on U.S. soil. What was the American response? The strategic thinking. I know they set up an airbase.
Right, the airbase on Adak Island was absolutely crucial. That gave the U.S. Army a forward operating base, somewhere to launch counterattacks from and, try to prevent any further Japanese moves.
Made sense. Air power was key.
It was. But it wasn't just about planes. The Navy got heavily involved, too.
Oh, how so?
Well, they started deploying submarines pretty actively up there. The goal was to hit Japanese shipping, disrupt their supply lines, trying to reach Attu and Kiska.
Ah, okay. Trying to starve them out, essentially.
Sort of, yeah. To isolate their forces, make it harder for them to sustain the occupation. It was a combined effort, air and sea pressure.
Which leads us, I guess, to a specific naval encounter. The Battle of the Komodorsky Islands. That was in March 43.
Correct. March 26th, 1943. And what's key about Komodorsky is that it wasn't some huge, decisive fleet battle like Midway. It was a U.S. Navy force intercepting a Japanese supply convoy that was headed for the Aleutians.
A supply convoy. So hitting the logistics again?
Exactly. The battle itself, well, neither side lost heavily in terms of ships sunk, but the result was that the convoy was turned back. The Japanese ships didn't get through with those vital supplies.
So it effectively tightened that logistical noose you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. It significantly disrupted their ability to resupply Attu and Kiska, putting much more pressure on their troops there. You could feel the tide starting to turn strategically.
Right, so the pressure's mounting. What came next? The actual move to retake the islands?
Yes. The focus shifted to retaking Attu first. The invasion began on May 11th, 1943.
Okay, May 43. Was there a push from leadership to make this happen?
There was. Rear Admiral Thomas C. Kinkaid was apparently quite persuasive. He argued strongly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff that dealing with the Aleutian situation needed to be a priority.
So getting the Japanese off American soil was seen as strategically important, not just symbolic.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about pride. It was about removing that potential northern threat. Anyway, the invasion of Attu, it was incredibly tough fighting.
I can only imagine the terrain, the weather.
Brutal, just brutal. Constant fog, bitter cold, mud. The accounts from soldiers on both sides are harrowing. It made every single movement, every engagement incredibly difficult.
But the Americans eventually succeeded.
They did. After weeks of really hard fighting, Attu was secured by the end of May 1943. An American victory, but definitely at a significant cost in lives on both sides.
A tough win. So, Attu is retaken. What about Kiska? That was the other occupied island.
Right. Attention turned to Kiska next. The plan was a joint operation.
Joint?
U.S. and Canadian forces together. The invasion was set for August 15th, 1943. Big buildup, lots of troops involved.
Okay, so a major assault plan.
Huge assault. But here's the anticlimactic twist, I suppose.
Oh.
When the Allied forces landed on August 15th, they found the island completely empty.
Empty. The Japanese had just left.
Vanished. They had managed a very skillful evacuation under the cover of fog weeks earlier, completely undetected.
Wow. All that preparation for the invasion. And nobody was home. Why do you think they pulled out?
Well, several reasons, likely. The loss of Attu showed the Americans were serious about taking the islands back. Plus, the naval blockade and air attacks, especially after Komandorsky, made resupply almost impossible.
So Kiska was becoming unsustainable for them.
Exactly. Strategically, it probably made more sense for them to withdraw those troops and use them elsewhere in the Pacific rather than lose them in what looked like an inevitable defeat on Kiska, cut their losses, basically.
Makes sense from their perspective, I guess. But what a surprise for the landing force.
Must have been surreal. Landing, expecting fierce resistance, and finding nothing. Just abandoned equipment and fog.
So that unopposed landing on Kiska effectively ended the campaign.
It did. The Aleutian Islands Campaign concluded with that recapture in August 1943.
Okay, let's step back a bit then. We've gone through the key events. What's the overall significance here? Why should we remember this forgotten campaign?
Well, I think fundamentally it was about securing American territory and neutralizing a potential threat. Removing that Japanese foothold prevented any possibility of attacks on the continental U.S. or Alaska launching from there.
Right. It eliminated that northern threat vector.
Precisely. And beyond the battles themselves, the campaign really highlights the incredible logistical effort involved. Just getting troops, supplies, building bases in that environment was a massive undertaking for the U.S. military.
Yeah, the support operations must have been huge.
Immense across many of the Alaskan islands, not just the ones directly involved in fighting. And you also saw the critical role of U.S. naval aviation operating in some of the worst flying weather imaginable.
It really does paint a picture of the sheer scale and difficulty of fighting a war in every corner of the globe. Now, if folks listening want to learn more, maybe see some images, where should they look?
Good question. For visuals, the Naval History and Heritage Command, or NHHC, has a Navy Art Gallery online exhibit with artwork from the campaign. It gives you a real feel for it.
Art from the campaign.
Yeah. And the National Archives has photos, too. There's a particularly striking one of Kiska after the Allies landed. For more detailed info and artifacts, the National Museum of the U.S. Navy is a great resource. They cover Dutch Harbor, Komandorsky, Attu, Kiska.
Okay.
And, of course, there are other official sources, too. The U.S. Army Center of Military History, the National Park Service, because some of these sites are now historical parks, and NHHC, again, have extensive records and histories available online.
Great resources. So just to quickly summarize the whole thing, we had the Japanese attacks in June 42, the occupation of Attu and Kiska.
The American response, building up forces on Adak, using the Navy to cut supply lines.
The key naval battle of the Komandorsky Islands, disrupting those supplies.
The incredibly tough battle to retake Attu in May 43.
And finally, the surprising discovery that Kiska had already been evacuated when the Allies landed in August 43.
That's a good overview. It's a really remarkable chapter of the war.
Definitely a forgotten tale.
It really is. And it speaks volumes about the determination on both sides, fighting under some of the planet's most challenging conditions, logistics, weather, remoteness.
Right.
It tested everything.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering that remoteness, those brutal conditions, what does the Aleutian Islands Campaign really reveal about the sheer scope, the resources, and maybe the unwavering determination of the powers involved in World War II?
It shows just how far-reaching the conflict was and the lengths nations would go to, even in seemingly marginal theaters.
A powerful reminder. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a truly fascinating and often forgotten tale of the past.